Hello, welcome to the Imperfect Show today. My name is Jeremy Stollenker. This is my lovely wife, Susanna, and normally she gives the introduction, and today she allowed me to give the introduction. So yeah. Thankful for that. I do a lot of talking, so she likes to preserve this moment for herself, but
no, not really.
She let me take it today, so appreciate it. Today we're going to talk about freedom and talk about liberty. This is the week of the 4th of July. This is the week that we here in the United States, and I say this because a lot of folks who watch this aren't necessarily from the United States, that we celebrate our nation's independence. And July 4th is the day traditionally that we celebrate the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and that's what put us on a course as a nation to have our independence from Great Britain and to become the country that we are today. And it's interesting, this is an interesting year to celebrate the 4th of July, I think, because there's so much unrest and turmoil in our country. A lot of political unrest. There are things in relationship to the coronavirus, which is a worldwide issue, of course. And then we're dealing right now with a lot of racial tension and other issues that are happening in our country right now. So it's an interesting time to celebrate freedom and to celebrate independence, but that's what we are doing this week. And I think one of the great things about the United States, again, we'll see how all of the things that we're struggling with right now, how it all kind of unfolds over the next several months. But one of the great things about the United States is that we are a country born out of turmoil. We're a country that has had struggles and conflicts, from foreign conflicts to civil wars to economic issues, things like the Great Depression. We've had health issues and so many other things that have happened in our country, but through it all, because of our foundation, we've been able to move forward and continue to celebrate liberty and freedom. Again, one of the interesting things about what we're dealing with right now is we see protesters out on the streets and people really screaming for what they perceive to be their rights. Some are correct and some aren't, but this is a right protected in our Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. And so much of what we see, and it looks like friction, it looks like difficulty and so forth, is the product of freedom. It's having the ability to stand up and speak and act. And so we're thankful for that. On the other side of that, though, and this is what I'd like for us to talk about a little bit today, there is kind of the national idea of freedom. There's what we understand to be patriotism and liberty. But these are words that are often misunderstood and put firmly in the position or the place of politics or political rhetoric or political talk, when really liberty and freedom, although they can be applied in a political sense, have a broad application to our lives. What does it mean to be free? What does it mean to experience liberty in our lives? And I'd like for us to talk about that for a few minutes. But let's talk about national freedom, what it is to be an American, what it means to be free as an American. We'll start there, and then we'll work to kind of some practical aspects of that. Maybe you can talk about that, and you can start us off on that conversation. So a couple things. One, your family immigrated to the United States. Mm-hmm. And so as an 8-year-old child, you left one country, you left Germany and came to the United States. And so, there is probably for you a more clear understanding of one country's view of who they are as opposed to another's. And that's something we've even talked about with your family, kind of more broadly. But then as we've traveled, we've seen some places that don't experience the same freedoms and individual liberties that we have as a country. And that helps to illustrate, I think, what it is really to be an American. Can you maybe just talk about that for a minute, what it means to you to be an American and how you've seen some of that illustrated over the course of your life?
So we moved, when I was 8, we moved here to the United States. My mom is American, so I was born in Germany, kind of spent a good part of my childhood there. Coming to the United States, for my parents, I don't know that it was necessarily for like the political freedom, right, like that we're talking about. It wasn't really about that. So we moved here. really culturally our home was still very German. So I would say the idea of, American government, the type of freedom, what the sacrifices that were made so that we could have that, all those things. I didn't really have a good grasp maybe of that until I went to college. Yeah. I had some U.S. history classes, junior high school, all those things. You kind of learn the history facts. But I think having an understanding of it and really kind of what that means for us today, and then also meeting you, and then us getting married, and you were in the military and all that, and then your family's very patriotic family, and just kind of being a little more introduced to American freedom in that sense didn't happen for me until I was, quite a bit older.
Right.
So, but really talking to my family now, like as, adults, and even having gone to Germany and, talking to my cousins and kind of some of that, and just the ideas that we have now, as we're a little bit older. And one of my cousins made a comment about how she thought the patriotism in the United States, she's just always admired that, and how everyone just so proudly, hangs the flag, and it's kind of a thing, we have the holidays, and we have songs, and, all those things that we very proudly sing and continue to do that. And so her kind of perspective on that I found was very interesting, and just talking with her about, some of that, and how her view on that now as an adult, and how she just kind of admires that. And she said, I just admire that people are still doing that, still, flying the flag and singing the songs and having these very patriotic holidays that a lot of people get behind. And it's just not like that everywhere. Now, Germany is an amazing country. I love the German people. I love going back and visiting. Wouldn't mind living there.
Right.
It's amazing. But when you look at the, maybe the political aspect of some of the freedoms that we enjoy here, it's just not the same everywhere else.
Kind of the national identity.
Yes. Yeah. And the way that we still so proudly cling to, what our forefathers kind of set, for in place for the people that live in the United States. So, and then also, we have had a chance to visit some other countries. We had a chance over the last couple of years to be able to go to the country of Ukraine. And a lot of people, maybe now are more familiar with what's been happening for them for the last, 10 years or so, and the fight that they've had with Russia, and to kind of gain their freedom.
Right.
And what I found was so impactful about our time visiting there is that they're kind of fighting for what a lot of people in the United States take for granted. Some of the daily things that we are able to enjoy, and some of the things that we are very normal to us, and we get to do all the time, they don't get to do in Ukraine. And they're fighting for a lot of those things right now. They're fighting to have the type of government that the United States has. And they're fighting for a lot of those freedoms, and that kind of religious freedoms as well, that we get to enjoy. And they're fighting for those things right now. And so I think what really impacted me when we went on that trip, or those trips, and the couple of different parts of the country that we got to see, is that people are really very passionate about fighting for the freedom. And I kind of feel like some of that passion has maybe kind of gone away a little bit for people in the United States. Yeah,
it seems, particularly in Ukraine, they understand the cost of freedom, the price of freedom, which we don't. I think I don't know if we talked about this here, but on other videos, that when the revolution began, the most current revolution in 2014, the Russian government placed Russian troops on the border between Ukraine and Russia, and then began to cede land from Ukraine. And so the response from Ukrainian citizens was to get in their minivans and their cars and grab whatever they had and make their way to the border so they could stop that from happening. And they won in some places, they lost in other places, but they deeply understand the price of national freedom and national liberty, and they're extremely patriotic.
Yeah, and it's become very personal for them, and I thought it's just a weird kind of thing to think about now, like people our age now are like doing these things and taking, then, took their personal vehicles and took whatever, weapons they could get a hold of, and wives fighting alongside their husbands and leaving their kids behind with grandparents or other family members so that they could go fight together really for the future of their family. And I don't know, it's very personal to them. Yeah.
I think we are struggling right now as a country with even whether or not it's okay to be patriotic. There are some people right now who are saying we should be embarrassed or ashamed of our past and all those things. And one of the things we struggle with as a nation is remembering our history. And there are a lot of folks who are trying to rewrite some of our history. Now, there's no reasonable person who can read believes that everything that's happened in the history of the United States has been good or positive. I think there are events, even long periods of time, that we could say there were some very bad things that happened during that period of time. I don't think we would argue with that. But in the midst of the bad things that happened, there have been some incredible things that have happened as well. And it requires a broad view and an accurate view of history to get the whole picture, instead of saying it was all good, which some people do that. And that's, your family will criticize that, right? Like, we know there are some things in America that aren't great, and yet you guys always want to talk about how wonderful everything is. There are certainly things that have not been wonderful. So if you look at it just from that aspect, you're not seeing the whole picture. But if you look at it from all of the difficult things and the bad things, you're not getting the whole picture either. Some real sacrifices in real lives and family turmoil and all those things, those sacrifices have been made so that we as a nation could be free. And we could be free to live as we choose and worship as we choose and do so many of the things that we as Americans take for granted. And a large part of that is because we've forgotten our history. To me, in Ukraine, that was one of the things that really spoke to me, was that their history is so important to them. Mm-hmm. They have a long history. It's not that they necessarily go back to. It's, really for many of them, their history begins during World War II, or just before that in the 30s, and the oppression by the Russian government, and then being brought into the Soviet Union, and then leaving the Soviet Union, and then a revolution in, I think 2000 or 2001, and then again in 2014. Their history is very real to them, and that guides so much of what they think. And man, that history is so important. And
they have such a desire to make sure that their kids know what their history has been, and I think that was really encouraging to see for a country like them. And I feel like that we've kind of lost some of that now. You know how, like you're saying, people are wanting to rewrite some parts of history and maybe not even, mention some things and leave some things out, or that person didn't really do all the things that, we've been taught up to this point that this person has done. And I really feel like a huge problem. One of the reasons we're having the problems that we're having now is, and this might be a topic for another day, is I'm very passionate about education and educating our kids and our children what, or kids are our children, I guess, but our kids.
Our kids and our children.
Our kids, educating our kids in that so that they can then go, live their lives and be able to then teach their kids. And that's what I feel like was so encouraging about the people of Ukraine, is that they just have such a desire for their kids to know what their history is, where they've come from, to bring them to where they are today. And I feel like we've lost some of that passion. The people of the United States have lost some of that passion to teach, our kids what the history has been and what the true history has been and what the full picture is, and teaching them every part of history, not just this little part that we want them to know, or we want to leave this part out, and I feel like that's part of the problem that we're having today, is that kids are not being taught a full history of the United States. And like I said, this is a topic for another day probably, but the fact that there are some college students who wouldn't be able to pass the citizenship test to get into the United States, that's a problem.
Sure.
But I feel like that goes back to maybe that passion and that desire having been lost for that history that we have that's so rich and that's so full.
Yeah, and if we forget what it costs to earn, gain, and then maintain freedom, there is no way that we can possibly hang on to it, because it's not valuable to us.
Yeah.
And that's a struggle. I think part of educating too is, and this is where we'll go next, is understanding even what those words mean, what freedom is. For real, what liberty is, and where those come from. As we educate our children and our kids and our children, as we just do our best as citizens living here to step back and understand these things, we have to have a clear view of what we're actually talking about. And to me, that's one of the struggles that so many folks are having right now, is they don't have a clear definition or clear view of what liberty and freedom really are. And what that causes is one, we lose sight of what we're trying to get to and what we're trying to hang on to, but it can also cause a real sense of despair if we don't know what those things are. Because inevitably our country is going to change. Inevitably the views of the people in our country are going to change. What's important to people will change. Politics will change and politicians will change. Economics will change. There's going to be struggles. There will be good times and bad times. And if we don't have a clear understanding of what freedom actually is and where it actually comes from, then as those things change, we believe that our freedom is also being taken away. And I think, to me, one of the important things about this topic is understanding what those actually are, understanding where they actually come from, and realizing on the other side, although some of our liberties can be taken, our freedom, the ability to do what we've been placed on this earth to do, that cannot be taken away. And we need to, I think, have a clear view of those things as well.
And that, when defining it that way, makes, it's kind of liberating, because it doesn't matter if you're an American or if you live in another country. I know this week we're talking about the 4th of July, but it doesn't matter, where you live or what the government in your country looks like. That freedom is for everyone. And it's not limited by the government, putting those restrictions on you or the government controlling you or telling you what to do. It doesn't matter, because freedom is not a government thing. Freedom is a people thing.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter where you live. I think one of the advantages that we have in our family is that we do have, kind of two different countries represented. And so we're able to kind of maybe give our kids a fuller picture of how, what the world looks like. And we have had the opportunity to travel to other countries and all of that, but, they've been able to go to Germany and they've been able to kind of see a different culture. And, in our families kind of mixed like that. I feel like that has given us the opportunity to give our kids kind of maybe a full picture of the world history and how that kind of all works together. And that's what I think is so good and important to realize about defining freedom like that, is that it's not tied to a government or a type of rule of a country. It's for people and it's for everyone.
Yeah. When you go back to the Declaration of Independence, our founding fathers, those people who put this together, Thomas Jefferson, of course, and then many others, they defined what they were fighting for, what they were hoping to gain by entering into what would inevitably be a war with Great Britain. What they wanted to obtain was the ability to practice what they called inalienable rights. This is so important for us to understand. The Constitution came later. The enumerated rights came later. That is the freedom of speech and the freedom of assembly and all of the other things that are illustrated or written down, enumerated, written down, spelled out. Those came later. But the high view, what they were actually trying to get a hold of, was the ability to act on what they called inalienable rights. Inalienable meaning they could not be taken away. And what they believed, and the reason for writing this document, and the reason for entering into this war, they believed that the government was trying to take away from them something that could not be taken away, which is really, really interesting. So they said that these were God-given, inalienable rights. They could not be taken away because they were given not by man, but by God. And then they said what those things were: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is really, really important to understanding this whole conversation. So God provided rights to humans that can't be taken away. Now it's crazy because humans enslave each other and humans oppress each other and humans do their best to hurt each other because humans generally are not great, right? Particularly apart from God and apart from faith and understanding who they are in Him. But we understand at a very basic level that God gave every human three basic rights. Life, that comes from God. And to try to separate the idea of freedom from an understanding of creation is really, it's a fallacy to say that you can have one without the other, because God, who is bigger and outside of all of us, gave us life, the ability to live. That's why we talk about in these conversations things like abortion and things like slavery of all kinds. And I know we're talking about racism right now in America, but slavery continues to take place. The owning of humans, the oppression of humans, the stealing folks for the slave trade, whether it's sexual slavery or whatever. Well, those things, why are they so evil? Well, in part because God gave us life. They come from God. The ability to live, that comes from God. That's not given to us by man. Liberty, that is the ability to exercise our God-given rights. And then the pursuit of happiness, and I think in America we struggle with this. It's not happiness that God gave to us. It's the ability to pursue what we believe will make us happy. That's a very dumbed down illustration. We could talk about that. But it is those things that our founding fathers thought were so important, they put everything on the line to obtain. There are those things that can't be taken away. It is life, because it's given to us by God. Liberty, the ability to exercise what God has given us to do, and then the pursuit of happiness, to pursue our own path. When we look at those things kind of from a political standpoint, micro, and then we zoom in and we get a macro look at our own lives, I think, to me, it's very, very helpful when we're talking about freedom. So that was our history lesson for today. So let's come back. Okay, so with that in mind, you said it's important to understand a right definition. And I think to understand those things. Because then you realize it's not your government that allows you to be free. It's not any of those things that allow you to be free. Because they're not given to us by the government or anyone else. They're given to us by God, and that's why we should be able to pursue those things.
It really takes a lot of the fear away, because when you have an understanding of that yourself, and all these things happening, the political arena in the United States right now, or coronavirus, which is worldwide, and it's a pandemic that's really brought a lot of fear into people's lives, and kind of fear of the unknown, or not just for the future, but like right now. I feel like it changes from day to day what's happening and the way people are responding to it, and all of that. And so it really takes a lot of that kind of fear away, because when you have the confidence in those things that God has given to you, and you're able to just know that no matter what's happening out here, I have the confidence that I have, that personal freedom, and I have the ability to do these things for my life. But then also it then translates into how that your kids see that. And I've talked to a lot of parents, and I've read stories of, kids who've committed suicide during this time because of this, and because of the unknown, and they don't know what's happening, and they're not able to socialize with their friends like before, and they're just constantly in front of a screen, and because we're not able to play outside as much anymore. Right. So all these things that are being taken away from us, but being able to communicate to your kids that, okay, we can live without fear because of all of these things, that makes a huge difference during a time like this. But then also, no matter what country you live in, that maybe you live in a country that there's a lot of oppression, or a lot of those things where, you can be afraid, and a lot of people live afraid day to day. But that fear of, I'm not living in fear of what, people are going to do to me. I might be afraid, but there's a difference between that and, living in fear.
Right.
Because you don't feel like that you have those freedoms that you were talking about.
I think if we also understand that these most basic freedoms, these things that we celebrate, are given to us by God, then we have to also believe that God knew the time and place that we would be living. So if God gives to everyone life, liberty, that's the ability to pursue what He set in front of us, and the pursuit of happiness, to find joy, to find happiness and contentment in our lives, well, then those things aren't tied to what's happening in the world. God knew where you would be living, when you would be living, the circumstances of your life, and yet He still endowed us. It says endowed from our Creator. He still gave us those rights. He gave us life to be lived in 2020 and all the craziness that's happening, wherever it is you happen to be living. As difficult as your political situation may be, or your personal situation may be, God knew you'd be in that, and he still gave you life. And he still gave you the ability to pursue the exact thing that he wants you to accomplish with your life. We were talking about this today, but my dad used to describe freedom as the ability to do what you should do. The ability to do what you should do. What is freedom? What does it mean to be free? It means not being tied to anything that would prevent you from being fully what God created you to be, the thing that you were placed on this planet to do. Freedom is being able to pursue that. Well, that is not tied to what's happening in Washington, D.C. or in Sacramento, California, or the decisions that our politicians make. And I'm as patriotic as anyone you might meet. I love America. I love the freedoms that we have as Americans. I believe that the government should stay out of our way and let us live our lives. But even if we lived in a totalitarian government with a dictator controlling every aspect of our lives, God knew that that was going to happen, and we still have been given the liberty to fully live out the life that he's created us to live. And that's where I think that I was going to say freedom, but the pressure that you were talking about that we live under, it goes away. That's a right perspective on freedom. Freedom isn't being allowed to do something because the government says that we can or can't. Freedom is being able to do what God wants us to do with our lives. I think it changes the whole conversation. I look down the road and I think about our kids and the world that they'll grow up in. And it scares me sometimes when I think about the things that they'll have to deal with. And the question, we talked about this, is, well, what do we teach them? How do we teach them to live in that world? Well, I think what we teach them is God is bigger than you. God is bigger than the world. God is bigger than whatever's going to happen in the world. And you need to know that whatever situation you may find yourself in, you have the liberty, you have the freedom to fully become what God wants you to be. And in that, even in what may feel hopeless, you can pursue happiness. Happiness isn't giddiness, it's a joy that comes from knowing you're fully engaged in what you were created to do and to be.
I think that's the reason that you hear stories of people, all the time. You hear stories of, like, in Vietnam, the POWs, and even during the Holocaust, the Jews that were in the concentration camps, and people that were able to survive that, not just survive it, like make it through it,
right.
but kind of almost thrive in those situations, and they were able to grow as a person and help others. And I feel like it has a lot to do with that mindset, that kind of a mindset that, those people might be able to put me in this place, but they can't take away the freedom that I have to do what God's called me to do in this situation. Yeah. And so I feel like that's kind of what we're trying to say here, as it has to do with our kids, as we're trying to teach them and show them what the future is going to look like. And even, I've even thought about, like, grandkids, it kind of makes me afraid even for our kids to have kids in the way that kind of the world is going right now. But just even keeping that, in mind, is that the way that people were able to, we have examples of people that have been through situations like that and have been able to come out having really helped people and made an impact even in those environments. And I think that can teach us a huge lesson. Yeah,
and there's tremendous hope in it. And for us, I think that's what motivates you to go forward in spite of what may be happening in the world. And, again, at a very basic level, understanding there's a price that's been paid for the freedoms that we have, the liberties that we enjoy nationally, as a country, as citizens of a country. And we need to value those. And as we come into a weekend like this one, we need to value those. But I think we also then need to reaffirm our commitment to freedom and to living the life that we were placed on this earth to live. So often, it's possible to look at what's happening, to feel bad about the direction that it's going, and to constantly be saying, it will never be the same again, we'll never get back to that again, my freedom has been taken away. Some of your liberty as a citizen may have been impeded or taken away. Things could change dramatically, but your ability to live in freedom, fulfilling the purpose that God has given you, that can never be taken away. It can be given away, but it can't be taken away. And in that, there is great relief, I think great peace, and that allows us to pursue happiness in our lives.
And even looking at, 4th of July, there's always a lot of, maybe community events or family things that you might do. And I've heard a lot of people talking about like, yeah, we're not gonna do that this year. We're not gonna, because there's nothing really to, people kind of feel a little bit hopeless. But I feel like this is something that can be celebrated. The human freedoms that we have that can never be taken away from us. And even on a holiday like this where, we might be looking at the political kind of climate right now. And we're like, well, we're not really sure where it's headed. Is there really anything to celebrate? Well, July 4th is not about our freedoms now,
right? Right.
Really. It's what's been done so that, people can live the way that they live now here. So,
yeah. And I hope that as you come into this weekend, that you'll step back, that you'll spend some time rehearsing what has been done in the past. Don't ever let culture or a bad education system or whatever take away your ability to reflect on what's happened before you, the history that we've lived. We've lived an amazing history as Americans, and good and bad, ups and downs, but a lot of wonderful lessons and a lot of wonderful people have gone before us. And we need to be thankful for that. We need to honor them. And then we need to look to the future. And somewhere deep in our soul, we have to say, it doesn't matter what happens in the future. I'll fight for my rights as a citizen. I will do that, and we should, because of what's been done in the past. But I'm going to move forward and fulfill the freedom that God has given me. And I'm thankful that He's bigger and He has a plan, and there's tremendous, tremendous hope in that. So I hope that's an encouragement to you. Maybe a different look on freedom, but I think an important one.
Yep.
So thank you for watching, and I do hope that you have a great weekend. We'll have a great weekend with our family as well. We're going to enjoy our time, and we'll talk to you next week.